Okay, guys, in this lesson, we're going to take a look at two-way tables. We're going to learn how to interpret a two-way table and create and complete a two-way table. So a two-way frequency table just displays the counts of two categorical variables. So for example, as you notice in our graph, we are comparing folks that take gifted classes or not to those that have extracurriculars. So we're going to see if there is an association of if you take gifted classes, are you more or less likely to have extracurriculars? Or we could look at it, if you take extracurricular activities, could we predict if you would be more, less, or equally likely to have gifted classes? So you can see that at the top, we have our columns, so gifted classes and on-level classes. So that's one category. And then the other category, our rows, in this case, are the extracurriculars and those that do not have extracurriculars. Now let's take a look at the totals. There are several totals in our two-way table. So first of all, let's look going across in this row. All the way at the end in this lower right corner is the total number of people that were surveyed, asking if they are in gifted classes or not, and if they take extracurriculars or not. Then we have the totals at the bottom of these columns. So this total is the total number of folks that take gifted classes. 22 is the total number of folks that were surveyed that have on level. Now let's look at these totals in the right column, all the way at the end. So 40 represents the total number of folks surveyed that have extracurriculars, and 20 are folks that were surveyed that do not have extracurricular activities. So we have several different totals. Again, this is the total people surveyed. Now let's write this joint frequencies in your notes. So joint frequency is the initial count. These are going to be the inside cells, and this is, as I was taking a survey, I was asking, are you in a gifted class? If so, do you have extracurricular? And I had 30 people that said yes. Then I asked, if you're in gifted classes, do you not have extracurriculars? And this gives me 8. This cell right here of 10 is folks that have on level and they have extracurriculars. I had 12 people that are in on level classes and do not take extracurriculars. So these inside entries are called joint frequencies because we're joining the columns with the rows. So joint frequencies. Marginal frequencies. So let's jot that in your notes. Marginal just means the totals in the margins. Okay, your margins is kind of like at the perimeter of your paper, or in this case, your chart, the margins. So these totals are called marginal frequencies. It's the sum of the rows, such as 40, and marginal frequencies are the sum of your columns. Now notice that 60 is not part of a marginal frequency, so do not consider 60 a marginal frequency. Just the totals of your columns and the totals of your rows, marginal frequencies. Again, 60 is going to be the total amount of folks that I surveyed in this survey. It is not a marginal frequency. It's just the total. So here we're asking, is there an association with being gifted and taking extracurricular? So could I make a prediction that if somebody is gifted, would they be more or less likely to have extracurriculars? Let's talk about two-way relative frequency table. So the word relative simply means percentage. So if you are being asked to find a relative frequency, you will be finding the percent, and it depends on the question asked. So let's review finding a percent. A percent is the part out of the total. That will give us a decimal. Then we multiply that by 100, and that gives us our relative frequency. So again, the word relative, you just need to think percent. And this is how you find a percent. You take the part divided by the total. And in this case, we're going to have several different totals, either the total of the survey or our total columns or total rows. So it's going to depend on the question. But once you find the decimal part, you must multiply it by 100 to get your percentage. Because remember, percents are based on 100. Okay, so again, we're either going to be dividing by the total surveyed, dividing by the row total, or dividing by the column total. It all depends on how the question is phrased. So here, relative frequency for the whole table means that we're going to divide every entry, all the joint entries and marginal entries, by the total surveyed. So when it says whole table, you're going to use the total surveyed as your divider. So let's take a look, and of course, let's use a calculator, and let's find the total entry, the relative frequency for the whole table. So I had 30 people that were gifted and take extracurricular divided by 60. Of course, that's going to be 1/2, and we can make these decimals. But then we want a percent, so we're going to say 50%. Sometimes they may leave it as a decimal, so just be prepared. Here we have 10 out of 60. That's going to give us 1/6. And then as a decimal, that's going to be about 0.16, and the 6 is repeating. Then we have 40 out of 60, which that simplifies to, 2/3, which is about 0.6 repeating. Here we have 8 out of the 60 people have gifted classes but do not have extracurriculars, and then this is going to reduce by 4. So we're going to have 2/15. And then, let's make this a percent as well. So this is going to be about 66.6 repeating here. Here we have, again, let's write the decimal and our percentage. Here we get 1.13 repeating, which is going to be 13.3 repeating percent, so about 13%, we could say. This one we could round to 17%, but we'll just leave it like this for now. And then 12 out of the 60 is going to be 1/5, which is 0.2 or 20%. Then we have 20 out of 60. That's going to give us 1/3, which is 0.3 repeating, which is 33.3 repeating percent. Then the total that were gifted is 38 out of 60 that we surveyed. And of course, that can simplify by a factor of 2. So we may have 19 over 30. And that gives us 0.63 repeating, which is 63.3%. And that 3 is repeating. Then we have 22 folks that are in on-level classes that we surveyed. And that's going to give us 11 out of 30. We have 0.36 repeating, which will be 36.6% with repeating. Then we're going to have our 100% of total. So this represents relative frequency for the whole table, where you are you are dividing every entry by the total number we surveyed. And here is our result. So sometimes we need to be more specific with a question, or a more specific question is presented to us, and we're going to be basing a relative frequency upon a row or column is called conditional. So if they are more specific, like those that take gifted classes, are they more equally or less likely to have extracurricular? So that way we are being more specific, and it's called conditional relative frequency. So the way we're going to get our percentage is we're going to divide a joint by a marginal frequency. So we're going to be dividing a joint by a marginal frequency. So conditional relative frequency by rows. So this is going to focus comparing students who take extracurricular to those that do not. So we're going to be doing by rows. So we're only looking at the information in the rows going horizontal. So we're not going to use these numbers at all. So our total that we're going to be using is the total folks that take extracurriculars or not. So our denominator is either going to be 40 or 20 this time. So conditional relative frequency for rows, you are just looking at the data in the rows. So 30 folks, so those that take extracurricular have gifted classes. 30 out of 40 folks that take extracurricular, 30 of them are gifted, have gifted classes. Then we have 10 out of 40 that have on level that have also curricular. So those that take or have extracurriculars, 40, 10 of those have on level classes. And again, this will be our 100%. Now, those that don't take extracurricular, what percentage of those have gifted classes? So the percent of folks who have no extracurricular but do have gifted classes is 8 out of 20. %. Then those that do not take extracurricular and have on level, that is going to be 12 out of 20. 3/5. So that's going to be 0.6 or 60%. So you can see that we have our 40% and our 60%, and it needs to be equal 100%. So let's just back up and look. So those that take extracurricular, 75% have gifted classes. So I could assume that if you take extracurricular, you are pretty likely to have a gifted class. Now let's look at no extracurriculars. For those that do not have any extracurriculars, 40% have gifted classes and 60 have on level. So it's slightly likely that you would have on level classes, but there's not a huge discrepancy between 40 and 60 percent. It's not a big gap. So it may be almost equally likely. I know 40 and 60 are not equal, but they're pretty close. But you could say that if you have no extracurricular, it's slightly more likely that you have on level classes. Now let's take a look at conditional relative frequency by columns. So this time we're going to only look at our categories in our columns. So we do not need any of these totals. We're only going to be using our column numbers. So we're comparing if you have a gift or in gifted classes, can I predict or is there an association that you will or will not have extracurriculars? So 30 out of 38 people that have gifted classes, 30 of those folks have extracurriculars. So let's get our calculator and divide 30 divided by 38. That gives us our decimal. I'm going to round. And then times 100 gives us our percentage. So that's a pretty high percent. So if somebody has a gifted class, it's pretty highly likely that they also have extracurriculars such as chorus, band, sports. Okay, so then we have 8 out of the 38. So 38 folks that are in gifted classes, 8 have no extracurricular activities. And that's about 0.21, which is 21%. And then here we have our 100%. So see, our 21% and our 79 add up to 100% of the people that have gifted classes. Now let's take a look at on-level classes. So 22 students that I surveyed that have on-level classes, 10 of those take extracurriculars. So this is going to be 10 divided by 22 gives us our decimal. So that is 4, 5 repeating. We multiply that times 100 and we get 45 point, I'm just going to go ahead and say 5%. You could put 4, 5 repeating. Then out of those 22 folks that are in on level, 12 have no extracurricular. So 12 divided by 22. This time it gives us 0.54 repeating times 100, and that moves our decimal. So I'm going to say 54 point, and again, I'm going to round percent. And then 22 out of 22, of course, is 100%. So here we have, we're comparing. We're doing it by columns. So if you're in a gifted class, you're very likely to have extracurriculars. If you're in an on-level class, it's about equally likely to have extracurriculars or not. So you really can't say that there is association with having on-level classes, but there is an association. If you're in gifted classes, you will probably also have extracurricular activities. That is conditional relative frequency for columns. So an association exists between two categorical variables if the row or column conditional relative frequencies, what we just did, are different. So the bigger the difference, so the bigger our percentages, so we had 79% compared to 21% of gifted folks that have extracurricular for those that do not have extracurriculars, you could see there's a big difference. So I know there is a strong correlation, or I should say an association. There is a strong association between having gifted classes, and having on-level classes. And remember, if the differences are pretty close together, then we're going to say that there is no association.